This week, science and technology revolutionized our lives, but memory, tradition, and myths limit progress. Also, what does Thomas Jefferson have in common with Carl Sagan? I'm DJ Alex, and this is your Hunky Vape Global 20 Vaping News Science and Advocacy Report for the week ending August 20th, 2021. In 1980, the Winter Olympics was in Lake Placid, New York. U.S. President Jimmy Carter proclaimed a grain embargo against the USSR, who then invaded Afghanistan, which then caused the U.S. to boycott the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow. Essentially, it was the heart of the Cold War, with a runaway arms race employing over half the world's scientists, and over 50,000 nuclear weapons infested our planet. There was no World Wide Web. It was a different world when I was growing up. Well, in some ways it was vastly different, but in other ways, absolutely nothing has changed. Pseudoscience has and always will be a threat to the world. But I'll get to that in a minute, because you first need to hear about Carl Sagan and his last interview. When I grew up, we didn't have cable TV. What we did have was NBC, CBS, ABC, and PBS. In 1980, at the age of 9, I got to watch Carl Sagan's Cosmos, the most widely watched series in the history of American public television. Cosmos was rich in prophecy. It was both the history of the scientific enterprise and an attempt to convey the soaring spiritual high of its central revelation, our oneness with the universe. This 13-part series transformed my love of Star Trek into a fundamental belief that science and technology will one day revolutionize humanity. I know, sounds cliche, but for a 9-year-old, the possibilities are infinite, just like the cosmos. Well, a mere 16 years later, Carl Sagan did an interview with Charlie Rose on PBS that is just as relevant today as it was back then. Charlie pointed out a New York Times article titled "Americans Flunk Science. A Study Finds Less than half of all American adults understand that the Earth orbits the sun yearly. Only about 25% of all Americans can pass a National Science Foundation survey of basic science and economics." Carl Sagan said it best. We live in an age based on science and technology, and we don't understand it. Then who's going to be making all the decisions about science and technology that are going to determine what kind of future our children are going to live in? Some members in Congress? Our government only has a handful of representatives with any background in science. And the Republican Congress at the time abolished its own Office of Technology Assessment. The only government office that gave Congress bipartisan, competent advice on science and technology was abolished. Did you hear that? In 1996, the government abolished the Office of Technology Assessment. Some of you watching this weren't even a twinkle in your daddy's eye yet. Anyway, I'm sure you're wondering, what's the danger in that, right? Don't they just bring in experts to testify when they need to learn about something that they're going to be making a law about? Well, I'm going to let Carl Sagan answer that question for you.
There's two kinds of dangers. One is what I just talked about, that we've arranged a society based on science and technology in which nobody understands anything about science and technology. And this combustible mixture of ignorance and power, sooner or later, is going to blow up in our faces. I mean, who is running the science and technology in a democracy if the people don't know anything about it? And the second reason that I'm worried about this is that science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking. a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along. It's a thing that Jefferson lay great stress on. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us.
Jefferson was amazing in his devotion to science. We think of Jefferson as this man who was literate and who was a passionate articulator of freedom. But if you go to Monticello,
Exactly.
what you appreciate is he was at heart a scientist, a botanist, an architect,
Geologist.
Geologist.
That's the same situation today. We don't run the government. The government runs us because the general population is ignorant of basic science. That is exactly why the vaping industry hasn't won any battles with science, and exactly why the government imposed laws and the bans that they're putting into effect are producing the opposite effects from what they intended. How many times have I said it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand how and why vaping works? You take a little vegetable glycerin, add your choice of water, alcohol, or PG-based flavorings. Thin it out a little more with some more propylene glycol. Add a little nicotine to eliminate the cravings from smoking sensation, and bam! Now you have a non-smoker. Okay. I left out the part about using a battery and wire and coil to vaporize the e-liquid for inhalation, but it doesn't matter because most people don't know enough about basic science to see how e-liquid that we use in our nicotine vapes can't hurt anyone. So it's no wonder idiot politicians are passing laws stating only natural tobacco flavors are allowed. They can't understand there is no such thing as tobacco-flavored e-liquid. And there is no tobacco derivatives in vaping, unless you use tobacco-extracted nicotine. But this is 2021, and we don't need a tobacco plant to make pure nicotine. Remember a few weeks ago when I talked about the 70-some-year-old anti-vaping crew of senators passing new federal tobacco regulations? In their minds, it's still 1980-something. Cigarettes are advertised in every single magazine, and even on TV. Life was so different in the 80s. High school seniors took smoke breaks during lunch hour at school. And a family gathering around the holidays would initiate new adults into the smoking world. So it's no wonder almost 72% of men and 55% of women tried smoking in 1980. And over 32% of people smoked cigarettes every day. And let's not forget the American Lung Association and their half-hearted and dim-witted advertisements to get people to stop smoking. Like either of these advertisements were actually going to get someone to stop smoking. Like I said earlier, in some ways, it was vastly different back in the 80s. But in other ways, absolutely nothing has changed. Ain't nothing to it but to get into it. Well, the first story of the day goes to the dim-witted politicians and their NGO buddies working on the Tobacco Tax Equity Act of 2021. Just another way to screw you out of more money. Senate Bill 1314 aims to equalize the excise tax on all tobacco products, including other tobacco products that we all know as vaping. This bill goes so far as to determine per-use basis to its equivalent tax rate for cigarettes. Naturally, All the usual NGOs are ironically on board with this tax increase. Just look at all the healthcare organizations and their associations who signed this letter in support of the new tax increases. Yeah, PAVE is also right on board with this garbage. Most of these are set to double the tax rate on the books now. But the smokeless tax is going from $1.51 to $26.84. And this bill also sets into motion an automatic increase for inflation. Think you can just import your products to avoid this tax? Nope. They're amending the Internal Revenue Tax Code to ensure that you pay your fair share come next tax season. Meanwhile, Kenneth Warner from the University of Michigan published an article titled, "Current Focus on Preventing Youth Vaping Could Hinder Adults' Efforts to Stop Smoking." Hundreds of thousands of people die every single year from smoking-related illness. But considerable evidence shows e-cigarettes are an effective smoking cessation tool for adults. I'm sure you probably heard about this one already. Warner and 14 other past presidents of the Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco Control co-authored a scientific paper that argues the media, legislatures, and the general public have developed a negative view on vaping, with a heavy emphasis on protecting the kids. We all know the public stance ignores the fact vaping helps adults quit smoking. Essentially, they're making the same recommendations as what New Zealand just implemented in their laws and on their books. Restrict access of flavors to kids, but allow all flavors at adult-only vape shops. It's all about balancing the risks with the potential benefits. And it's shocking to see that 1 in every 7 U.S. adults remains a smoker today. And if nothing changes, smoking will kill another 480,000 of our fellow citizens this year alone. Do you think any of the senators or NGOs working on the Tobacco Tax Equity Act are going to read this article or the paper in the American Journal of Public Health? Maybe if we all print a copy of this and then send it to them, maybe just one of them will actually get around to read it. Maybe? I'm going to email a PDF copy to my representatives after uploading this video. Don't know if it's going to do any good, but at least it's worth a try. Moving on. Thank you, Jim McDonald, for another excellent article. This one's titled, "Less than 2% of California high schoolers vape daily." I think it's interesting how daily vaping and daily smoking are both less than 2%. But marijuana use remains unchanged at 15%. I don't hear any hay being made about teen marijuana use, but teen vaping rates are constantly in the news. I think it's atrocious how vaping is always plastered in the headlines like rotting carnage, simply because they aren't looking at the real science. What does science clearly document? The results indicate that just a handful of students in the average California high school are daily vapers. But that's not what you're going to see in the sensationalized news reports every single day, all around the globe. Anyway, link in the description if you're interested. The next bit of news comes from the Aotearoa Vapers Community Advocacy and was published in the dailyblog.co.nz. New regs, terrible timing for vape businesses and consumers. New Zealand's costly vape regulations will drive many small and medium-sized businesses to the wall. Rising prices will also leave many vapers with little choice but to return to deadly cigarettes. It's the same situation we saw in the UK when they didn't designate vape shops as essential services during their COVID lockdowns. But these new regulations are even worse. This month has seen the New Zealand government ban the most popular vape flavors in general retail outlets, including all supermarkets, service stations, and convenience stores. They can now only sell 3 flavors: mint, menthol, and tobacco. Meanwhile, specialized vape shops are closed because of their new COVID lockdowns, or so far away for some people that it's just not practical for them to shop there. We all know what's going to happen next. When people can't access the safer alternative to smoking, they will simply go buy a box of the Duries and light up again. Nancy Lucas also points out some practical matters required by these new laws. How on earth will manufacturers print all the required ingredient, warning, and safety messages on a 15 milliliter bottle of e-liquid? It's completely unachievable. Ultimately, it boils down to this myriad of unnecessary complex red tape will add significant cost to Kiwi businesses and vapors, removing all but 3 flavors in general retail, while stocking a full range of cigarettes and tobacco products. It has also taken away adults' rights to access safer nicotine alternatives. When doesn't government-required red tape cause more problems than it intended to solve? Moving on to some good news for a change. We've been talking about Malaysia vapors asking the government for regulations for months upon months now. Well, it looks like they might get their wish, as the newly appointed Prime Minister has a history of supporting the vaping industry, despite what the Health Minister says. Coming from the Associated Press and published in the Federal News Network, Malaysian King picks ex-Deputy Prime Minister as nation's new leader. Ismail's appointment essentially restores Muhyiddin's alliance. It also brings back the rule of United Malay's National Organization, which had led Malaysia since independence from Britain in 1957, but was ousted in 2018 elections over a multi-billion-dollar financial scandal. King Sultan Abdullah Sultan Ahmad Shah said Ismail had secured the backing of 114 lawmakers for a slender majority. He said Ismail, 61, will be sworn in as Malaysia's 9th Prime Minister on Saturday. The announcement came after the monarch met state Malay rulers who advised him on the appointment. The king's role is largely ceremonial in Malaysia, but he appoints the person he believes has majority support in Parliament as Prime Minister. Sultan Abdullah said in a statement that he hopes Ismail's appointment will bring an end to the country's political turmoil. He urged lawmakers to set aside their political differences and unite to tackle the country's worsening pandemic. Malaysia has one of the world's highest infection rates and deaths per capita, despite a 7-month stay of emergency and a lockdown since June. Daily new infections have more than doubled since June to hit the new record of 23,564 on Friday, bringing the country's total to over 1.5 million cases. And deaths have surged above 13,000. A lawmaker before he joined politics, Ismail held several ministerial posts in previous UNMO governments. In 2015, as trade minister, Ismail courted controversy when he urged ethnic Malay consumers to boycott profiteering Chinese businesses. He was also slammed for supporting the vaping industry, which is dominated by Malays despite health warnings from their health ministry. With change in leadership comes opportunity for people to see real change. Will it happen? Only time will tell, because it's time to reveal an article published by MSN in their City AM. The World Health Organization's war on vaping is a lesson in terrible risk management. We all heard about Pfizer having problems with contaminated Chantix in the USA, or Champix as it's called in the UK. Well, rather than recall the carcinogen poison pills, the US FDA in their infinite wisdom simply changed the allowable limit for that carcinogen from 37 nanograms per day to 185 nanograms per day. There is an obvious irony in using a potentially carcinogenic product to quit smoking. There is even an added irony in the carcinogen in this instance being a nitrosamine. Nitrosamines are some of the main cancer-causing ingredients in cigarettes. Did you get that? Nitrosamines are some of the main cancer-causing agents in cigarettes. It's not the nicotine. Anyway, the FDA's explanation for bending the rules is that it doesn't want to discourage the use of the product, which is still much less dangerous than smoking. The health benefits of stopping smoking outweigh the cancer risk from the nitrosamine impurity in the varenicline. This is a pragmatic response to an imperfect situation, and yet it comes at the time when the United States is going to war on e-cigarettes. Last year, the FDA banned the sale of all vape cartridges containing flavors other than tobacco and menthol. Studies have shown that when e-cigarette flavors are banned, more people smoke more cigarettes. A range of flavors is vital if you want smokers to switch to vaping. Like varenicline, e-cigarettes might not be 100% safe, but they're a lot safer than the alternative. Advocates of vaping can point to a wealth of evidence showing that the risks are tiny compared to the risks of smoking. At least 95% lower, according to the World College of Physicians, since the overwhelming majority of vapers are smokers or ex-smokers. It is the relative risk that matters, not the absolute risk. We are in a similar position with the vaccines for COVID-19. They are not perfect. They offer about 95% reduction from severe disease and death. But that is sufficient for life to get back to normal. And as with all vaccines, there can always be side effects. Serious complications are rare, but they do happen. Overall, they provide a massive net gain. Just like with vaping. Vaping is 95% safer than combustible cigarette smoking. And yet, the WHO is also fiercely opposed to e-cigarettes. A WHO report published last month called for countries to either ban their sale completely or subject them to harsh tobacco-style regulation. They are eager to stress that e-cigarettes are harmful to health, although it is far from clear what those risks might actually be. When it comes to vaccines, the World Health Organization is interested in relative risks and the overall effect of the health on the population. But when it comes to vaping, however, it cannot see beyond tiny and largely hypothetical absolute risks. From the perspective of health, it might be better if nobody smoked or vaped. But that is just not a realistic proposition. We have to meet people where they are. It would be better if COVID-19 disappeared off the face of the planet, but that isn't going to happen either. In an imperfect world, we often have to settle for second best. A 95% reduction in risk is a lot better than no reduction at all. If health agencies took the lessons that they learned from regulating pharmaceuticals and then applied them to people's lifestyle choices, we would have more sensible laws and a healthier population. Holy crap! I was beginning to think a Microsoft-based company would never tell the truth about vaping. And here, we finally have Truth Butter published in MSN City AM by Chris Snowden. Let's give him a round of applause. Yeah! Damn. Well, since we're giving a round of applause, how about a round of applause for 5 celebrities who quit smoking thanks to vaping? Leonardo DiCaprio, Katy Perry, Johnny Depp, Simon Cowell, and last but certainly not least, an 82-year-old actor who is destroying many people's central social stigma about vaping. Namely, only youth use vaping. Let's hear it for Jack Nicholson! Amazing job, celebrities. Well, not all celebrities. After completing the research and scripting this Global 20 Vaping News Science report, it's come to my attention that there is an ill-informed celebrity making an ass of himself. Billy Baldwin can't wait to sue all the vaping companies for the damage they're doing to children. William Joseph Baldwin, you have no idea what the hell it is that you're talking about. Must be nice to sit in one of your multi-million-dollar estates and tweet crap like that. Your father would rip you a new asshole if he was here today. For those of you that don't know, Billy's dad, Alexander Baldwin, was a public school teacher for 28 years. Prior to that, Alexander was a United States Marine and an expert marksman in riflery. In fact, during rifle instruction on Parris Island in 1945, Alexander was shot and subsequently had to be honorably discharged because of the accident, which led him to complete his degree and become a history, social studies teacher. This charismatic father of 6 kids was tough and uncompromising. So, with 6 kids, you know that this ex-Marine was strict and not afraid to dish out inevitable consequences when it was due. If he was anything like my father, you knew the consequences weren't going to be light-handed either. But I digress. Billy's dad was very well-read. He was a very bright guy, and he always stayed well-informed. He even read the New York Times and Newsday cover to cover every day with a lit pipe. So now you know Billy's dad was a pipe smoker. But what you don't know is that Alexander Ray Baldwin Jr. died April 15th, 1983, from lymph cancer / lung cancer, just like my father died in 1990 from the same thing. My father also smoked while he was in the military, but quit before I was born. Regardless, now you know Billy's upbringing, which is exactly why I know his father would rip Billy a new asshole if he was here today. William Baldwin, your father would expect you to actually learn the facts and read about science and read about vaping before you start tweeting about it. Billy, we might have grown up with the same basic upbringing, and both of our fathers died of cancer while we were young. But that is where the similarities end. In the 80s, while I was working my way to graduate high school and then enlist in the Naval Reserves to pay for my first college education, my first attempt at college education, you became a fashion model for Calvin Klein. And in the 90s, you rode along with Chicago Fire Department Squad 5 and played firefighter Brian McCaffrey for the movie Backdraft, while I actually joined a volunteer fire department and became a paramedic to save people's lives, while you were acting the part on a special rooftop set constructed on scaffolding. I was, as you said in the movie, actually up there doing it. Day in and day out, I volunteered for the fire company to serve my community and only got paid when I worked for multiple volunteer fire company ambulance services, covering 4 counties to save people's lives who were involved in real accidents, not the staged or pretend accidents that you deal with on a movie set. I did it so much that my kids dressed up as police and firemen for Halloween and ended up becoming volunteer firefighters themselves. To this day, my oldest son is an active volunteer firefighter, and my other son is in the Air Force serving his country. Meanwhile, you just play the part in movies. You know, after putting in 110 hours a week for 15 years, I am no longer an active paramedic. I got burned out. But it hasn't stopped me from continuing my education, getting 3 master's degrees, and continuing to save people's lives. While you were filming Backdraft 2, I was still volunteering for the local fire company, even though as a life member, I'm no longer obligated to. Just like how I serve the community of ex-smokers advocating for tobacco harm reduction through vaping. Meanwhile, you make a mockery of Gregory Conley because you don't understand the need for safer alternatives to smoking. You go even further to show your ignorance by saying because vaping is 95% less dangerous than smoking, it doesn't mean it's not dangerous. Except you left out the 95% safer part because you're a moron and refuse to actually learn about something before you start talking about it. Then you tweet that you can't stress enough the seriousness of lung injuries associated with the use of e-cigarettes or vaping products. You asswipe elitist. Maybe you should read about how tainted black market THC carts cause all those lung injuries. And it has nothing to do with nicotine vaping. No. Why would you actually do like what your father would insist you do? And learn about something before you go start tweeting about it. It's so much simpler to call Greg Conley a political whore. Except, see, I know you were very close to John F. Kennedy Jr. And I also know that you worked as an aide on Capitol Hill for U.S. Representative Thomas J. Downey. So you know exactly how government works. Without people like Gregory Conley lobbying Congress, ex-smokers like me are going to lose our right to a safer harm reduction product. And before you go off half-cocked, let me tell you, I am not a political whore. I am not paid by anybody to do this weekly news report, nor have I ever gotten anything from anybody in the vape industry. I do all this on my own time and on my own dime, just like I did as a volunteer firefighter. But you wouldn't understand that because you forgot where you came from. Don't you remember your dad lighting his pipe every day before he sat down to read the New York Times and Newsday so he could stay informed and educated about what's actually going on around him? Now just imagine for a moment if he would have been able to use a product that was at least 95% safer than lighting tobacco on fire. You know, even as an actor, you know exactly what it's like to breathe in smoke from combustion, to cough and hack up a lung. But you have no idea what it's like to actually be a smoker. Why don't you do a little bit of research about it before you decide to send your next tweet out? Overcoming addiction to cigarettes is difficult, to say the least. Some say it's the most difficult thing they have ever done, but it can be done. Because I know firsthand how hard it was to quit smoking and how many times I tried smoking and how many of those bullshit pharmaceutical products that are out there that the doctors push on you, you have to try before you come and find something that was so simple, any idiot can figure it out if you have some basic understanding of science and how it works. Because it works to quit smoking. And it worked for the 5 celebrities I talked about earlier. It worked for me, and I guarantee you it can work for any smoker. And you want to know how I know about that? And how I know for a fact that it can work for any smoker? Because there are multiple scientific studies proving it. But you're too fucking lazy to go find out about these studies. You just want to read the political bullshit that you hear here or there or from your little buddies. How about you actually get involved and do something constructive with your life? No, you leave that to us advocates. So maybe the best thing that I can do is to ask you to at least be respectful to these people that are fighting for my right to keep on vaping. Maybe that's why Mirage News published the next article as education. Current focus on preventing youth vaping could hinder adults' efforts to stop smoking. Yeah, I know. You didn't come here to hear me go off on a tangent or to flip out on some celebrity that is never going to watch this video. But the point is, with repetition comes educational mastery of a subject. And maybe Billy Baldwin should read this and get some education. I'm sure if his dad was here, he would insist on it. Sorry, guys. I can't be like other advocates and simply ignore what Billy Baldwin says. Moving on. Considerable evidence suggests that e-cigarettes are an effective smoking cessation tool for adults in the United States, where hundreds of thousands of people die of smoking-related illness each year. Kenneth Warner, Dean Emeritus and the Avitus Donabidian Distinguished University Professor Emeritus at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, says, the potential of vaping to increase smoking cessation has been largely overshadowed by media coverage and policies that focus on the potential risk vaping represents to teens. Warner and 14 other past presidents of the Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco Control co-authored a scientific paper that argues the media, legislators, and the general public have developed a negative view of e-cigarettes because of the heavy emphasis public health organizations like the WHO have placed on protecting kids from vaping, while ignoring the potentially substantial benefits of e-cigarettes in helping adults quit smoking. The scientific paper is published online in the American Journal of Public Health. Warner discusses why the group, all of whom have presided over the top tobacco research society in the world, decided to take on this issue. There's a link in the description if you want to know more, because I think the point has been made very clear. It's beyond time for a balanced approach to electronic cigarettes. It's time to drop the negativity around vaping and end the vaping war. Which brings us to a town hall article published by Lindsay Stroud. Juul gets hosed for providing research. Michael Bloomberg does it all the time. We talked last week about Senator Elizabeth Warren and Richard Blumenthal sending letters to the FDA and the FTC urging their agencies review Juul's behavior, publishing scientific research in a scientific research journal. But Lindsay Stroud points out, what's alarming is that lawmakers don't seem to understand that the pre-market tobacco product application requires every e-cigarette company to conduct these studies. Indeed, many small manufacturers are frightened by the looming September 9th deadline, when all of their products must be approved by the FDA. But even more problematic is that these lawmakers claim that Juul's recent publication is another example of tobacco industry misleading the public and public health officials about the dangers of its products. If people are worried about a conflict of interest, maybe they should turn their attention toward Michael Bloomberg's billions, as the former mayor turned philanthropist has a long history of funding studies to examine the initiatives that he finances. The example she gives is when Bloomberg donated $675,000 to support a sugary beverage tax in Berkeley, California in 2014, which they adopted in 2015, and then in 2017 funded multiple studies to prove that his tax increases worked and that it had XYZ benefits because of his tax increase. Wait a minute. Nothing happened in 2016? Yeah, right. In 2016, Bloomberg pushed Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney to tax sodas and use the money to fund universal pre-kindergarten education. And then let's not leave out $13 million that he donated to guarantee Cook County, Illinois implemented the soda tax. Or how about the $2.5 million that he spent to study the effects of the new taxes after they were passed in Illinois? You know, we could go on and on about Bloomberg and how he's buying the world, one city at a time. But this news report is already way longer than people will watch. Or, in the article's case, what people will read. So let's wrap this up by showing you Lindsay begging former Mayor Elizabeth Warren to destroy Michael Bloomberg. When she was competing for president against the former mayor, Warren destroyed Michael Bloomberg, pointing out that he was a billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. It would be welcomed if she would destroy him again by pointing out his clear conflict of interest in regards to public health initiatives. If policymakers are troubled by a company like Juul publishing required information on their products, they ought to start going after every other company that does this. Policymakers should also reform the FDA process that requires these studies to be done and peer-reviewed. It would be best for people to examine Michael Bloomberg's billions. Policymakers at all levels of government should utilize non-Bloomberg funded sources to determine whether Bloomberg-backed proposals actually work. Oh, another round of applause for Lindsay Stroud. Yes, thank you. Amazing. What a wonderful piece of literature. Thank you for publishing that. I really needed that. Almost as amazing as the science paper published in the American Journal of Public Health titled Balancing Considerations of the Risks and Benefits of E-Cigarettes. Yes, I know we've already covered this already. But that's because this paper needs to break out of our advocates bubble. We sit here and talk about advocacy, and you watch your programs, I watch your programs, you watch my programs. We're all jumping around talking about it, but nobody actually pays attention or listens to it or learns from any of this that isn't already an advocate. Well, this paper needs to break out of that advocate's bubble. And I want all of you watching this to go to the scientific journal, go to this article, and share it on all of your social media platforms. Yeah. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Reddit. If you got a website, go post it on your website. We have got to get more people to read at least this one scientific paper. If you want change, go do it. Go make it happen right now. I mean it. Pause the video right now and go get a copy of this and go send it off to a politician. Go send it off so that it breaks out of the bubble that we live in. I'll be here when you get back. Seriously, go do it right now. Welcome back. Thank you. I truly appreciate you sharing that scientific paper. And so, since we're already talking about science, I've got one more for you. Some more science for you. Young people and electronic cigarettes. New study disproves the gateway effect. Yet another denial of the theory that sees e-cigarettes as the gateway to smoking. Australian research based on data from the United States and covered United States minors determined there is no evidence that the use of electronic cigarettes has increased traditional smoking among young people. That's it. Seriously. That's the summary of the research. There's no evidence. What? You want more? You don't believe me? Okay, fine. Science requires that you be skeptical. So here we go. The proponents of e-cigarette bans and restrictions justify their positions in Australia as well as in the United States and Europe, with the protection of minors. According to their thesis, vaping would actually be a gateway to smoking for young people and would normalize this much-fought harmful habit. Yet, argue the defenders of harm reduction, the data do not confirm this view. And indeed, youth smoking rates decrease with the spread of electronic cigarettes. In essence, once again, the gateway effect does not stand the test of reality. In 2 national surveys of young Americans, the authors conclude the prevalence of smoking has decreased by a considerable relative percentage. The intention to smoke in the future and the perception of the harm of smoking have decreased or have remained unchanged while the use of the electronic cigarette has grown. The results provide no evidence that e-cigarette use has increased conventional cigarette smoking among young people. If anything, it seems that the opposite is happening. A much less harmful alternative is distancing minors from burnt tobacco. See? I told you, it really is that simple. Moving on to the UK, published in Manchester Evening News, Never Quit Quitting. The campaign inspiring Greater Manchester smokers to quit and reap the benefits. Quitting smoking is tough. It takes patience and being kind to yourself as you navigate the difficult journey. It also takes practice, changing habits, beating cravings, and taking control of your life. But as thousands of former smokers across Greater Manchester have found, it can be done. And by drawing on the free support available locally, smokers are 3 times more likely to quit with vaping than willpower alone. I'm going to skip over the health changes when you stop smoking because you vapors have already felt the experiences firsthand. There's a link in the description if you want to read more, if you're not a vapor, just happen to be watching this news report. But there's one last thing I want to cover before we move on. The article documents Nikki Fenton's quitting smoking journey. Multiple quit attempts and multiple relapses over several years. So what finally got Nikki to become an ex-smoker? I quote, "I managed to quit overnight, and I gradually reduced the strength of the vape liquid until I was using no nicotine. I now feel much better, and I have managed to save money, which is very helpful, as I'm currently unemployed." No surprise there. Vaping empowered Nikki to become an ex-smoker. Fantastic. How about we have a round of applause for Nikki quitting smoking? Yeah! All right. Way to go, Nikki. All right, moving on to Philip Morris. Yeah, I know. You don't want to hear about PMI and their heat not burn. But you know what? Harm reduction is harm reduction. And when you're looking at things on a global scale or on a scale of a society, anytime you reduce harm, you improve the quality of life for your citizens and you improve their overall health outcomes. So I need to cover it, especially when new data shows that IQOS may be less effective than Juul for smoking cessation. Yeah, I know, we all hate Juul, but reality is, and the science proves, it is more effective for smoking cessation than heat not burn products. Ironic, isn't it? A product that doesn't involve combustion is more effective than a product that technically doesn't involve combustion, but is still giving you the exact same heated smoke product, right? Well, can't argue with science. I mean, you can, but the data, the more studies you do, the more data you have, the more certain you are of the findings, because you can't argue with the numbers. At some point, it becomes so strong, you just can't argue with it. It becomes fact, or viewed as like fact. Well, Philip Morris International has now closed almost all of its flagship IQOS stores in the United Kingdom, as its heated tobacco product failed to replicate the success experienced by vape products over the last decade. I think it might have something to do with the fact that their IQOS product is a patent infringement on British American Tobacco's intellectual property. But what do I know? That's not what was in the article. So, here's the wonderful thing about science and technology. It keeps propelling us forward at an ever-increasing rate. And every day, it keeps marching on with a new development just around the corner. Well, since PMI can't use its blade heating system, because, we talked about how British American Tobacco won the patent lawsuit. So, what's PMI going to do? They're not just going to bail, right? You think they've been sitting in the sidelines doing nothing? They're not going to pack up and just move on. They're going to release the technology they've been working on as the improvement, as the upgrade to the bladed heating system. PMI launches bladeless IQOS in Japan. Published in Tobacco Reporter, Philip Morris International has launched IQOS Illuma, the brand's first tobacco heating system based on induction heating technology in Japan. And we know why they're doing it in Japan, because heat not burn is all the rage in Japan right now. There's hardly anybody lighting an actual cigarette on fire in Japan because they're using heat not burn. I mean, that's fantastic. On a society level, it's harm reduction at its finest. Well, the IQOS Luma has a smart core induction system, which heats the tobacco from within the new Terrera Smart Core Stick. Terrera Smart Core Stick. Well, anyway, these newly designed sticks are to be used only with the IQOS Illuma, probably because they don't have the same moisture content in them. But I don't know. I'm never going to use a heat not burn product. Anyway, there's an auto start function, and it detects the stick as soon as it's stuck in there, and it automatically turns on a device and automatically starts the process for those that are using it. And according to PMI, the bladeless IQOS devices offer a cleaner way to heat tobacco from the core without ever burning it. They also provide a more consistent experience and leave no tobacco residue, eliminating the need to clean the device. Additionally, the device generates no combustion and no smoke. PMI says its market research indicates that IQOS Illuma provides a more pleasurable experience compared to the previous IQOS generations. IQOS Illuma is our most innovative offering to date, and the new flagship in our portfolio of science-backed, smoke-free products. Its breakthrough induction heating technology heats tobacco from within without burning, so there's no smoke, no ash, and like previous IQOS devices, it emits on average 95% lower levels of harmful chemicals compared with cigarettes, said Michelle Catatani, Vice President of Heated Tobacco Platforms at PMI, in a published statement. Wow! 95% less harmful product compared to cigarettes. Hey, PMI, you got any science to prove that? I'll wait. Meanwhile, in the UK, the Institute of Economic Affairs publishes World Health Organization wrong to treat vaping the same as smoking. Yeah. Another article bashing the World Health Organization for its calamitous position on vaping. Oh, man, I should be getting really excited about it. And I was when I did the research for this. But let me just go on and read this Christopher said, from the perspective of health, it might be better if nobody smoked or vaped, but that's not a realistic proposition. Wait a minute, I heard this before. We have to meet people where they are. It would be better if COVID-19 disappeared off the face of the planet. I read that before. That sounds familiar. But it isn't going to happen either. It's an imperfect world. We often have to settle for second best. A 95% reduction in risk is a lot better than no reduction at all. Read the full article here. Oh, man. I knew it was too good to be true. There's no way MSN would pen a pro-vaping article. It's the same article we covered earlier. It really was a great article. You can check it out. There'll be a link in the description below. But reality's reality. He wrote this. He works in the UK. I understand how it ended up being what it was, where it was. Anyway, moving on to talking retail. Since we're in the UK, Tobacco and Vaping, a New Leaf is the title of this one. Keep in mind that we're still in the UK, okay? Or at least that's where this publication is published. The latest in a growing number of restrictions kicked off by the display ban several years ago. There were fears the ban on menthol cigarettes last May would disrupt the category once again, after too many legal upheavals in recent years. Too many recent upheavals in recent years? The UK hasn't had hardly any legal upheavals, not like what we've experienced here in the United States and what Canada's experiencing and a bunch of other countries all around the world. At this early stage, some 15 months on, it appears that those fears were misplaced, as the category has remained buoyant, and many former menthol smokers appear to have switched to alternative formats. Man, that makes sense. Tobacco companies have also been busy with new products to plug the gap left by the absence of menthol brands, and many of these have proved popular with shoppers. Vaping suppliers also spotted the opportunity with a launch of menthol alternatives since May 2020 to cater to those smokers who prefer that taste. The result of this burst of activity from suppliers is that the menthol ban has not proved as significant as was feared at stage one. The article continues with steady growth, gaining momentum, shopper demand, and talking about the illicit trade. And this is all because the UK understands vaping is a substitution product that is much safer than combustible cigarette smoking. It also understands that flavors are not the same thing as flavors from burning tobacco. Menthol-flavored vapes do not contain any menthol, just the cooling sensation from the flavoring agents. And that's already been tested as safe for inhalation. Isn't science exciting and fantastically fun? Now, if we could just get the idiots in the United States to use science-based policy making instead of this backroom garbage that we deal with on a regular basis, using fear-mongering tactics to dumb down a populace that doesn't know how to do science or read science or look into things with a skeptical point of view. Nope. Here in the United States, they keep pushing for the same bans and the same crap. And the Columbia-Boone County Health Board is going to submit a report to City Council on Monday that includes a recommendation to ban flavored vaping products. The move is a part of a set of recommendations meant to reduce youth vaping rates, which are already less than 2%. But we got to reduce it even more because we don't honestly believe that, kids aren't going to be experimenting if we just ban it. Kids follow the law, right? They don't experiment. That age in your life, did you experiment? Seriously. But they're moving forward with it. Do you think the flavored vaping product should be banned? Vote in the poll below. Actually, if you wanted to vote in the poll, I'll have a link in the description below. You can go vote in it yourself. I already voted no, and so did 71% of the other people that already voted on this. Moving on to Canada and the largest mobilization of Canadian vapers. Vape Tour 2021 will give voice to the 1 million Canadian vapers besieged by federal and provincial regulations. Despite ongoing threats of a flavor ban, nicotine limits, and increased taxes, as well as persistent misinformation campaigns, Canadian vapers are undeterred in their fight for tobacco harm reduction by ensuring that vapor products remain available, accessible, and affordable from coast to coast. Vape Tour 2021 will reach out to the forgotten 1 million Canadian vapers and give them a voice. More and more regulations at both federal and provincial levels are threatening the access, availability, and affordability of vapor products. Vape Tour 2021 will bring the truth about vaping to towns and cities across Quebec and Ontario, and mobilize vapors. It's time to save vaping, and it's time to save lives. The Liberal government will have no choice but to hear our voices. In the past, we have been silenced and marginalized. This tour will show candidates in this election that vapers will no longer be ignored. This is a fight for our lives. And like has been said before, I shouldn't have to fight this hard to save my life. Rights for Vapers is using the same tactic that the World Vapors Alliance is using. Drive a mobile billboard across the continent to empower the voice of vapers. And you know what? If that vehicle, that RV, that mobile billboard was here in my town and my town was getting ready to hear or propose some ridiculous ban, I'm sure I would go and I would have my voice be heard at city council. And I'm sure you would too if it happened in your town. Quite honestly, I wish somebody would give me a Class A RV to drive across this country to promote harm reduction through vaping, because I would certainly jump on that opportunity. It's time we put our message in the face of the people. I'm tired of these sneaky backroom deals removing our right and our access to harm reduction products. I don't want to end up going back to frickin' smoking, which is exactly what they're doing when they establish these bans, these flavor bans, these increased taxes. It's pathetic. It really is pathetic. I think that thing should be parked in front of every single government body across the country. And as soon as you catch wind that somebody else is getting ready to talk about something in a council meeting, we should have a fleet of these vehicles to park in front of that city hall. And we should get social media, and we should get everybody to come down and put their voice in the discussion. Tired of our rights just being stolen away from us for no reason other than this ridiculous panic over nothing. Anyway, flavors are an important component to the vaping experience for adult smokers. Flavors help smokers migrate from traditional cigarettes to vapor products. In 2019, Parliament conducted hearings on the amendments to the Tobacco Act, Senate Bill 5 for them, Bill S5. Experts told the federal government that flavored vapor products are important, and it's time that all governments listen. You're damn right it's time that all governments listen to ex-smokers. Brilliant! Check out her post as they're driving across Canada. I'll be retweeting them as I see them, but you can get on and you can follow her and follow this RV as it drives around from city to city, from province to province. Time to move on. Juul Altria must face most antitrust claims over the 2018 deal. Now, this article comes from Reuters. A federal judge has allowed most claims to go forward in antitrust litigation by e-cigarette purchasers, accusing Juul Labs and Altria Group of working together to suppress competition in the e-cigarette market. The plaintiffs claim that Altria, threatened by competition from Juul's popular e-cigarettes, agreed to discontinue its own Mark X Elite e-cigarette line in exchange for making an investment in Juul that would allow it to profit from its rival's success. They say that reduced competition in the electronic cigarette market led to fewer choices and higher prices. In seeking to dismiss the antitrust case, the defendants argued that the real-world data shows Juul actually lowered its prices and lost market share to other competitors following the deal, meaning that the plaintiffs cannot have suffered an antitrust injury. Plaintiffs, however, said that the short-term loss of market share was caused by Juul's withdrawal of fruit-flavored products under pressure from the U.S. FDA. The battle continues, and updates will be published as they happen. Moving on to some good news. Totally Wicked remained totally committed to support the Blackburn Rovers. Totally Wicked CEO Marcus Sexton commented, "Working together with Blackburn Rovers to support health and fitness initiatives amongst the community enables us to continue to raise awareness of the positive role that vaping plays in helping to eradicate smoking and empower more people to quit smoking for good. I think it's awesome to see vaping companies support athletic teams, and I wish that we were allowed to see that same type of behavior here in this country." Moving on to Hungary, or Magyarország if you're Hungarian, and reactions to steep increases in tobacco taxes. Published in the Vaping Post, after being taken to Court of Justice of the European Union by the European Commission in 2019 for failing to apply the minimum required excise duty on cigarettes, Hungary has been incrementally increasing the local tobacco taxes, making the products unaffordable to most locals. This means that someone who smokes one pack per day will spend roughly 51 to 55,000 forint, or 142 to 153 euros per month for cigarettes, which amounts to about half of the current minimum wage. Half of minimum wage is the new cost of cigarettes in Hungary. Absolutely ridiculous. Almost as ridiculous as congressional lawmakers once again burying vaping prohibition in a bipartisan infrastructure bill. If you ride on Amtrak, the National Railroad Passenger Corporation / U.S. federal government railroad company, no vaping allowed. Sorry. Clean air policies prohibit smoking, so naturally, because politicians don't understand that vaping is not smoking and doesn't produce smoke, well, we're still going to ban it. Maybe it's time to require candidates who run or wish to run for office to take a minimum competency test to meet eligibility requirements for public office. I bet you 3/4 of these lawmakers would fail a basic science and economics test and would be forced to find a real job to make ends meet. Moving on to Australia nightlife and the vape debate. Listen, some of you can barely justify the time it takes to watch this Global 20 Vaping News Science and Advocacy Report. But I spend 10 to 20 times the amount of time you do to make them. You know, I'm not complaining. That's not why I said that. I'm just simply stating facts. Well, this week, I was all fired up after listening to the vape debate on nightlife with Philip Karp. Yeah, it got so bad that I had to restart the recording so I could take notes of all the lies being told to their Australian listeners. And what really infuriated me was how little Alex Woodcock, The director of the Australian Tobacco Harm Reduction Association rebutted these lies. To be fair, the interviews were probably recorded separately and then spliced together. So maybe he didn't actually know what was already stated on the show prior to him speaking. But I got so angry listening to this vape debate. Vape debate? It was ugly. The show started off talking about smoking rates in Australia, dropping from 25% in 1991 to 12.8% in 2016 and 11.6% in 2019. Philip Clark also stated the vaping has grown from 1.5% to 3%. Okay? He also quickly explained vapes are cylindrical tubes with pods or tanks and are electronic devices used to vaporize e-juice, which is made up of chemicals and oils combined with flavorings and nicotine. Hello! There are no oils in nicotine vapes because breathing in vaporized oil will give the user lipoid pneumonia. Why can't people understand fundamental science? Next comes Dr. Chris Moy from the Australian Medical Association, who couldn't stop regurgitating lies. Like a patient with amoebic dysentery. And for those of you who have no medical background, amoebic dysentery is caused by a tiny parasite that attacks your bowels and gives you diarrhea forever. Now imagine having so much diarrhea that you puke it out of both ends at the same time, and that's exactly what it was like listening to the Australian Medical Association Vice President talk about vaping. First question that was asked of him, what's in Australian e-liquid? You know what his answer was? Nicotine is common.
Oh, no, you did it. That's some bullshit.
It is illegal for anyone in Australia, well, once the pharmacies are allowed, but right now, and for the previous month, it is completely illegal for you to sell e-liquid in Australia with nicotine in it.
What? Seriously? That
Yeah. How is the Australian Medical Association vice president telling people that you go and you buy e-liquid and it's got nicotine in it because nicotine is common? Only on the black market would it be common, not in any legitimate vape store. Once the prescription model goes into place, you'll be allowed to buy from a chemist, which us Yanks call compounding pharmacists. But it is not possible for a vape shop to sell e-liquid with nicotine in Australia. It's illegal. You have to have a prescription to have nicotine. And so far, they've been importing it into the country. The 200,000 some vapors that are in Australia, that's how they put nicotine in their e-liquid. Anyway, let's calm down. Let's move forward because it just got worse from there. Okay? He said that there's flavorings to make it attractive. Well, of course you need flavorings to make it attractive. What's the point in vaping something with no flavor? Because if you just simply use this with vegetable glycerin and propylene glycol, it would just be sweet. Well, why would anybody want to vape it? People would rather smoke their cigarettes. They're death sticks. However, it gets worse. He then said that the flavorings that are used to make it attractive are loaded with proven carcinogens.
Attention, the bullshit meter has detected major BS.
Yep. And then he said, I told you it kept getting worse. And then he said it's a complete free-for-all after that on what ingredients go into the making e-liquid. And then he pointed out that these e-liquids cause 2,000 to 3,000 lung injuries and 60 to 70 deaths in the United States and countless lung conditions because he has no idea what we're dealing with. And he has no idea what the long-term consequences are of vaping because people import them with anything in their e-juice. He said that e-juice is not useful and no evidence that it helps. He then even said, there's no evidence that it leads anybody to stop smoking and that it is simply just a Trojan horse to get people to start smoking. He said, we don't have any other aspects of nicotine replacement therapy or nicotine products. What? The only thing in common with this and nicotine replacement therapy, and I don't know what other nicotine, you talk about nicotine sprays, is the nicotine. That's the only real similarity in it. Actually, the nicotine sprays have more carcinogens and flavorings than what goes into our e-liquid. But whatever. He kept talking about how nicotine is a toxin and it's addictive and it hampers brain development and that talking about how children are hurt by using the nicotine. Well, it's against the law for them to have it, so how are they doing it? Don't you think it'd be more important to actually punish them for breaking the law than it is to take adults' rights and throw them out the garbage because of somebody that's doing something illegal? I mean, that would be like banning all cars in this country because somebody decided not to use their brakes when they were driving a car. They would just smash into people to stop or slow down. So we're going to ban all cars. Would you like that? Do you want your cars banned? Because that's what they're doing with vaping. You might not see it like that if you're not a vapor, but I can see the correlation like that. Like I said, amoebic dysentery with tiny parasites eating the bowels and diarrhea coming out of both ends. That's exactly what it was like listening to this guy. Next came Dr. Alex Woodcock, a harm reduction expert from the Australian Tobacco Harm Reduction Association, talking about vaping and how it's the methadone of smoking. A bridge from heroin via methadone needle syringe program and harm reduction. Resistance was the same as vaping from smoking. That's where he comes from. He comes from the harm reduction pools, and that's where his initial experience was with heroin addicts and giving them methadone so that they don't use heroin and dirty needles and reducing the spread of AIDS. So now he's the one that's advocating for vaping in Australia. But the problem is a lot of these people are so out of touch with reality. I mean, I know the content that I provide on this channel and on this news report is over some people's heads. Imagine what his conversations are. Then again, it's not fair to bash on this guy because he got bashed enough when they got done asking him about some basic common sense facts of vaping in this interview. You know, he stated there's 68 million vapors around the world and absolutely no deaths have been attributed, scientifically proven, to be the cause of nicotine vaping. Not one in the whole planet. He also stated the number of yearly smoking deaths equal the combined totals of the deaths from alcohol and prescription drug misuse and illicit drug use and suicide and HIV and road crashes combined. To put things into perspective for people, I applaud him bringing that type of statistic out because people forget what the real harm is. The real harm is actual smoking. That's the battle. That's the enemy that we need to defeat. Then he said that vapor is essentially droplets of steam, droplets of water, and e-juice is made up of vegetable glycerin, propylene glycol flavoring, and a minuscule amount of nicotine. So bystander danger is insignificant, if at all, present. And he even pointed out that science has shown, and continues to show, vaping is 70% more effective to quit smoking than nicotine replacement therapy. But then the host started sidetracking him and questioning him why Athra got its startup money from a vaping company. And then the battle turned defensive to justify that it was only to get the website up and running and to get the organization up on its feet. The battle was over at that point, and to bring in the home run for the opposing team came Professor Emily Banks, who obviously does not support vaping, takes the worst case scenario and portrays it as an everyday reality. She said that most people quit smoking successfully by cold turkey, and cold turkey is the only way that people should really try to quit smoking because it's the only one that's going to work. That's essentially what she said. And right there, I just threw up in my mouth a little bit thinking about it. I'm beginning to wonder, is amoebic dysentery contagious enough that I can get it by listening to somebody with it? Of course not. But listening to them talk about vaping was excruciatingly painful. Almost as excruciatingly painful as the next audio file from ABC on Breakfast with Reich Goddard. Especially when the Australian Medical Association sent a different representative this time. Dr. Annette Barrett stated, "Not all GPs can write a script. They have to get trained from the TGA, not their organization, and that the training requires the doctor to have the patient convince them that that patient needs nicotine and that the script that they're going to get is only going to be issued for a very short time to quit smoking and to quit nicotine." There were details about how to get nicotine if you got a script from your GP. But she was so condescending about vaping because the American Medical Association, the Australian Medical Association, doesn't want patients to use nicotine vaping. She said health risks from vaping include no good reason to put things in your lungs. Not around long enough. Hasn't been around long enough. And causes harm. And causes dying from vaping. Almost like an allergic response. It was so horrible listening to her, I couldn't determine which one of these audio podcasts annoyed me the worst. I'm not even going to go any further into it because this doctor was basically telling listeners not to bother getting a script because it's a waste of time. The Australian Medical Association doctor said that, I'm just going to move on. I'm not even going to cover what she said because it was all lies. I can show you scientific studies that prove everything she said was a lie. Well, there were so many lies I'd have to bring out a stack of scientific studies to discredit every single thing that she said. I feel bad for you if you're living in Australia and listening to this and realizing what you guys are putting up with over there. I thought it was bad here in the United States. Holy crap. Well, one last thing I want to talk about in Australia, and I know this thing is way, way too long already. I'm sorry, but I'm like a pit bull. I can't let go. So, how about in Australia, because of this change in the laws and the TGA having availability of nicotine in local pharmacies, so that as a vapor you can fill your script at a pharmacy, they're going to be allowed to advertise. Yeah, the TGA has today published a revised TGA advertisement permission allowing pharmacies and pharmacy marketing to groups to promote through certain media that they are able to dispense nicotine vaping products, such as nicotine e-cigarettes, nicotine pods, and liquid nicotine on prescription. So pharmacists in Australia can advertise that they sell nicotine to quit smoking, but every other business in Australia is fucked like a dead cat if they want to help somebody quit smoking using vaping. Gotcha. Makes perfect sense. Moving on to Manila, Senate Bill 2239 regulates vape market. Advocates of vaping as an effective means for adults to quit combustible cigarettes, as well as those pushing for the non-sale of the same to minors, has found a credible sponsor in Senator Ralph Recto. The president pro temp of the Senate endorsed for plenary approval on May 26, Senate Bill 2239, or the Vaporized Nicotine Products Regulation Act, which empowers the government to regulate the importation, manufacture, sale, packaging, distribution, and use and consumption of vapor and heated tobacco products. Congratulations, Manila. You are so far ahead of the United States, you make me feel like I live in a third world country. The UK has done its own thing regardless of what other countries or the EU wants. So, let's take a look at how the UK is allowing vapes to save hundreds of thousands of lives. Published in Filter Mag, Martin Cullop says, I am rather happy that my country is widely regarded as a global leader in tobacco harm reduction. Enthusiastic take-up of vaping products has led to the UK boasting the second lowest smoking prevalence rate in Europe, behind only Sweden. Sadly, it hasn't always been this way. Bollocks! I just realized how long this new report has gotten. So I'll just show you a single excerpt from this article. University College London estimates that every year 50 to 70,000 people quit smoking using e-cigarettes who would not have done so by any other means. A collaborative US-UK study published in 2020 concludes that this will prevent up to 200,000 avoidable deaths in England alone by 2052. And yes, the rumors you heard were correct. They do have vape shops in NHS hospitals in the UK. There is now a cross-party political consensus in the UK, with little denial from any politician of the benefits of tobacco harm reduction, at least regarding e-cigarettes. Tobacco harm reduction is also being more widely considered, meaning reduced risk options such as nicotine pouches and heated tobacco products are being debated for England's upcoming tobacco control plan. Previous incarnations spoke of maximizing the availability of safer alternatives to smoking. With this progress, the question is, where do we go from here? Well, with some talking of an end game for tobacco use and the UK government committing to achieving a smoke-free 2030, that is less than 5% smoking prevalence, our recent history would suggest an accelerated decline in cigarette sales driven by the wide availability of smoke-free alternatives as the best way to go about it. The UK just needs to follow past success, pursuing a light but sensible regulatory regime and a positive information environment for all reduced risk nicotine products in order to drive down cigarette sales even further. We've done it before, and it worked. Well, that wraps up the Global 20 Vaping News Science and Advocacy Report for the week ending August 20th, 2021. I truly appreciate every single one of you for subscribing and watching this weekly report. Until next week, be good to each other and keep on vaping.